Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, I'm very excited to introduce our guest for the day, Matt Ryan. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Suja.
Yeah, really excited to just hear about the work that you're doing in the space because I know you're kind of on the cutting edge of some stuff. So, let's see. Do you say your company name Revive or is it Reviv?
That's correct. Yep, you nailed
Revive.
it. Thank you.
Okay. So I know you're doing very interesting stuff today in the co-living and micro apartment space, which I want to hear all about. But why don't you take us back and give us a brief background on what you did prior to kind of your real estate development and value add work that you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. I started out in real estate doing house hacking, which I didn't know was house hacking at the time. I came out of college, ended up working for my family's business for about 3 years. I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, where houses were dirt cheap. I bought my first house, I think for $135,000 or something. Bought a foreclosed condo in Charlotte that I relocated my business to later, for about the same price. Real estate was cheap. I could house hack, get a roommate. That's kind of how I got started. But going back to like where my career started in construction, yeah. So it was 2009, 2010. I said, hey, I don't think I want to work in my family's business, looking for a career. And the American Recovery Reinvestment Act under Obama, they had allocated a significant amounts of funds for clean tech, and specifically energy efficiency implementation in light commercial and residential buildings. And they said, this is going to be an interesting way to kind of reignite the construction force, workforce that has been decimated by the 2009 and the housing crisis and so on and so forth, in addition to bringing solar to scale. I went to a couple conferences, got really engaged in the industry. I love the idea of kind of tackling this larger problem. And so I started there. I said, hey, I'm going to do energy audits for residential. I dove into the work. I passed all my classes, got my first contract while I was still kind of moonlighting for my father's business. I remember it's funny, I would come home at 5 o'clock and then I'd work for 2 to 3 hours every night, just trying to get stuff going. Yeah, I got a contract in Charlotte, North Carolina, and never looked back. Broke profitability my third year. But after the end, about 5.5 years of kind of being a jack of all trades, master of none, I was really going to have to really start migrating in towards a collective subcontracting company, taking insulation, HVAC, foundation waterproofing, a lot of these things that we have been doing under the envelope of building science, and kind of integrate them all together. Well, there have been a lot of people who tried to do that. A lot of them had failed. And I said, I think I kind of want something a little bit bigger. I had toyed around in real estate. I bought my first investment property in 2013, which was a foreclosed duplex. And, the light bulbs just kind of started going off. I had a few meetings here in San Francisco, one with a gentleman who had tried to scale a similar company and raise capital to do so. And he kind of laid out the groundwork for me, and after a little bit of soul searching, I realized that, I had done well with my real estate project, my duplex in the Wilmore neighborhood. I had the Miss Pam project, which was, the one pager that I took to a local real estate developer, which really kind of became the genesis for Revive. And, after about a year of kind of kicking stuff around, I'll never forget a good friend of mine and I were on the phone, and I was trying to get jobs with commercial contracting companies, to basically work in the trailer for developers. And he goes, Matt, what are you doing, man? And I go, what do you mean? What am I doing? I'm trying to find a job. He's like, dude, you are not employable. He's like, you march to the beat of your own drums. You're an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
essentially, like, you're not going to work for anyone else. Go
Yeah.
do your thing, find what it is for you. And, I don't say that to kind of like puff myself up or anything like that. It was really cool advice that I still, obviously transcended time for me, and love and appreciate that he was able to give that to me and just be like, hey, you're not going to go work for someone. And I think he was right to some degree. I was willing to pull the trigger and do it, but ultimately it was that was another little genesis, another little bump in the road that said, you know what, I need to double down on this and I really need to go full force into it. And so that's what I did.
Yeah, for sure. I can totally relate to the being unemployable and marching to the beat of your
I
own.
still think I'm employable, by the way. I was a little bit lost perhaps.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of just a joke, but I sometimes because there's always a good fit or there's always a potential good fit. So, but yeah, I mean, I think there are some people who are just better suited to kind of run the show themselves, and kind of make your living kind of based on your own efforts rather than what someone else is like willing to pay you. So,
Yeah.
okay, very cool. So thanks for that background. I'm curious now if you would, in terms of getting into like your real estate value add construction on your own, what was your first move?
Yeah. At that time, I had a little bit of capital. And was looking, I had put it with a stockbroker that my dad had helped introduce me to, who was kind of managing this little bit of money. I think it was like $55,000 or something on my behalf. And, at the time I was just like, man, we got like 2% return over the year. I was like, this is kind of a joke. Like I think I can do better. Right. So I just started scouting properties in around Charlotte, and I found this foreclosed duplex in 2013. Another good friend of mine had really been on me about buying a duplex. He had, specialized in commercial real estate through college. He had a professor who was like, buy a duplex. It's the best, kind of turnkey investment you can make in your life, yada, yada. And so that was really it for me. I bought it. I hired a general contractor. We put about $35,000 back into the property. And I implemented some of the energy efficiency and green building stuff that I'd used, which I was really excited about. And I still tell a story and joke, about it, that I actually showed it to a couple that I kind of knew through my network of people, but I didn't have the lights turned on yet because we hadn't gotten our full electrical upgrade or whatever. And I never forget some of my friends being like, dude, you took those people over that property at night with no lights on, and you honestly think they're going to rent it from you? And I was like, well, yeah, I guess so. Just very naively. And
Yeah.
interestingly enough, like 48 hours later, because I had put this little one pager together, I think they just saw that I was really dedicated and I was passionate about my construction, even though half of the stuff maybe didn't even mean anything to them. And it was a good value, for the neighborhood and all that stuff. And so that was kind of a little funny, other anecdote of just like, I was kind of just in my own mind, getting this thing started, not even realizing. But I think people, like I said, they kind of bit off on what I was trying to do. And like I said, I think it had a lot to do with the affordability component, but I always chalk that up as like, that was my first real estate deal. Cause that was the one that I did it start to finish. And then of course I ended up selling it when I moved to San Francisco because I needed the money, and ended up 1031ing that into another deal. And that was a big game changer for me. So.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool. Okay. So I know you've done a lot in between then and now, and I'm really curious about the work that you're doing now with co-living and micro apartments. So I guess let's just start with co-living. Can you help us understand what that space is and what the market is that it's serving?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a 22 to 35 demographic. I always tell people this is a market that already exists. If you go into Craigslist in a major, metropolitan area like San Francisco or Oakland or New York, you go down to the roommate share, aspect of Craigslist, you'll see a bunch of listings there, right? And so what co-living did, both from a development perspective and the property management perspective, is it added a professional level to that, call it product or service, which is instead of having to go to interview with roommates through people, do this Craigslist thing. Now you're conducting business with a professional organization that is running the property management on the back end. And many have provided, tech forward platforms where you can literally thumb through particular rooms or roommates and particular properties that you may want to live in, and have very upfront pricing and expectations around that, how you're going to split the utilities, what amenities and services are there, like cleanings and furniture and all that stuff. So it's just a much more turnkey solution. So once you saw this on the prop tech side, property managers moving into the space, of course, developers started paying attention to this and said, okay, now we're going to start doing some purpose-built co-living micro apartments. It's also called affordable by design because through COVID, co-living took a little bit of a hit and now everyone's scared of using co-living. I mean, I'm not afraid of something as simple as a term. I think the product, kind of speaks for itself. But yeah, I mean, that's the basis of it. And for us, what we were focused on early on was we really like those boutiques, small scale, 10 to 50 bedroom with a mixed use component for co-working. And we really tried to do a lot of that in Oakland and Berkeley initially. and kind of tying the opportunity zone, tax benefit to that. And it was a little too niche, and there wasn't enough product on the ground for us to ultimately execute on that. And so post COVID, we were still very much a boutique developer, still very passionate about doing co-living. And so, by way of kind of the softness in the office market, we were able to find two buildings that were formerly residential, have been converted to law offices or professional offices that were really great setups for co-living. So we're converting those back to co-living or residential in Denver and Sacramento. And they just followed the fundamentals of a good real estate deal, which is we got in a really good basis, relative to local comps, plus our, cost of construction. And luckily the renovations weren't too knuckle dragging, even though, both have a little bit of a historical component to them, which has created a little extra level of nuance. But, for us, it was also just about not only kind of proving ourselves in the co-living space, but proving ourselves as a developer that we can navigate those nuances.
Yeah, for sure. So then who is the property manager or will be the property manager?
So a lot of these property managers, like I said, they were severely hurt through COVID. And so one of the ones that had a relationship with Open Door would typically handle smaller properties. But post-COVID world, they were saying, hey guys, we won't not only enter a new market, but we're not really willing to touch anything smaller than say 20, 30, 40 beds. And that's kind of been true through a lot of the operators. So the unfortunate part is we're going to have to self-perform on the initial property management for these, and continue to focus on growing and scaling our operations in those prospective markets so we can use a property management company in the near term. But given the size and the scope, we're not particularly concerned about it. But property management is a tough business. It's hard to make money in it. And I've been advised by a lot of very experienced investors, and we've seen it in the prop tech space. Some of those early, venture-backed co-living operators who were supposed to be operators got really heavily involved trying to be developers and be property managers. We want to try to avoid that mistake, and I think we have a very clear vision for that. But the short answer is we're gonna have to self-perform in the near term. So it's gonna be a quick, death by fire.
Interesting. So, and then maybe you have a little bit of perspective on Open Door and what happened during COVID. I mean, obviously, I guess people didn't want to live in co-living arrangements during COVID. So have things kind of recovered since then? And would a company like Open Door, who's like pretty, I mean, I assume they're fairly established in the space and an industry leader. So how did they view co-living going forward?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, we haven't talked to those guys in a while.
Yeah.
They're still very bullish on it, still very committed to it. They were committed to the why behind co-living even before the financial aspect of it. So I still think they're very committed. We didn't have as much insight to them as how they performed, but we worked with a developer who was actually working very closely with Common, who's the largest co-living operator. And the numbers that we were seeing from them through COVID was actually fairly strong. Like they were outperforming, if not performing, at a level of the institutional companies when it came to occupancy collections. I think they were like 93% across their portfolio. Now they had a significant amount of vacancy. Anecdotally, when I spoke with Ben Probin of Open Door during pandemic, he said, yeah, we've had a couple properties with very small rooms and footprints that have maybe struggled a little bit to fill. But generally speaking, we're doing fairly well in that we've even had people come to us that through, shelter in place were like, I'm lonely, I'm in a studio, and I just want some sense of community. I want some sense of engagement. And I thought that was really interesting to hear, because at the time it was doom and gloom, like co-living was dead and all these other things. And it was like, if you didn't have a good product, you were going to suffer. But the good operators with good product, with good spatial design, I think they continue to weather the storm and do fairly well. And just a quick thing with Open Door, for a new market, they wouldn't enter into a new market unless they had a bigger bedroom count. So for us we approached them about doing Denver together, and they were like, hey, we really need more size and scale there to be able to enter a new market. And that makes sense,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I think that stands true for a lot of industries, right? Like the better operators and the operators with better assets were able to were more insulated from market shifts. I think that was true in the short-term rental industry and true in multifamily, senior living, et cetera. So, okay. So, and then just a question of that, you mentioned the why behind co-living. I mean, obviously I have my own ideas about that. I mean, I've certainly lived in roommate situations before. What would you define as, how would you define the why behind co-living?
Yeah, I think the first and the biggest one is affordability.
Hmm.
There's 45 million Gen Zs who are going to hit the marketplace. I think interestingly enough, they're facing the same problems that our generation faced, the millennials,
Yeah.
right? Economic recession, extremely high housing prices, lack of affordability, paying 35 to 42% of their income. And so for them, and urban cores are going to perhaps arguably produce the majority of the jobs coming out of recession. Historically, that's what they've done. So how are they going to secure housing, live close to the amenities that they're seeking, and be able to go towards those higher paying jobs? I mean, they're going to have somewhere to live, and there's not many options for them. So I think affordability is, that's the backbone of why we're here,
Yeah.
right? And I think beyond that, and what I love about the co-living community is just like how much it's iterating on itself. Europe has a very well established model. They there's a software developer there that just launched a platform that literally has a matchmaking service for operators. I mean, they're iterating and they're getting so much better at providing this idea of co-living kind of as a service, almost like to a hospitality level. And I think that's really interesting. So when we talk about amenities and service, and just call it steal a term from the tech community, something that's less frictionless
Hmm.
for that, because every single one of the people we're talking about grew up on cell phones, right? They want it now. They
Yeah.
want to be able to look at what they need, sign a lease, do all of it right there. So I think the accessibility and the ability to have a very frictionless experience for them is also a linchpin. They want to be able to move in relatively quickly, not have a lot of barriers to entry. And I mean, for me, whenever I moved to San Francisco, and I think you and I were talking before the podcast, like we both lived in San Francisco. It was hell.
Oh my God.
I mean, it
I
was.
remember going to roommate interviews. I would go when I was looking, and I would go to these like, okay, you're going to meet the people, and there would be like 50 people interviewing for one room, and you're like supposed to, it was like a sorority interview or something, but like they were only going to choose one person, and it
Yeah.
was, is that what you mean? That was hell, I thought.
Oh yeah, I remember walking in the rain, like to go to one of those meetings, thinking to myself, like, what am I doing here? Like, why? What is it about this city that's this attractive?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just really, it's so difficult to secure housing,
Hmm.
and it shouldn't be that way. It really
I
should.
know. It was just such a puzzle. It was such a
Yeah.
puzzle. Yeah, I remember one time I finally like, I ended up hitting like just a super sweet thing where I somehow I did manage to land one of those open room things. I don't even know
Hmm.
how. But I think it was because actually those girls were like kind of transitioning out. So then like a month after I moved in, they were like, well, actually we're all moving to the Mission. So, but no, if you want, you can stay and you can invite your friends to live here. And it was actually perfect because then I actually literally got like all my college friends to move into that house. Because of
Nice.
course nobody hasn't, everybody wants to like a better living situation with their
Yep.
friends that's affordable and stuff. So anyways, but before that it was just, yeah, it was like it was really tough.
Yeah, and I think that demographic is, the struggles are there and they're present, and they're not going to change because nationally we're still facing a massive shortage, especially in these urban cores, and even in the areas in between. John Burns call them the suburban, not the suburban, not the urban, but those arterial corridors. We're not producing enough in housing. There's too many barriers for developers. So I
Okay,
don't see
so
this being needed.
yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Just so much demand out there. So, but I do have a question though about making it work, and I'm sure I'm sure you have an answer to this. But just in terms of so affordability, I get. But what about, Gen Zers like either wanting community or like-minded community, or also just managing the household, like sharing bathrooms, kitchens, and just like not having roommate issues, or like how do you manage that as an operator of co-living places?
Yeah, I mean, my general understanding is you have to have a very strong thesis around self-respect and community. The nice thing is more and more like our adaptive reuse, these office conversions, we're trying to position more and more bathrooms in a
Mhm.
particular setup, so there's less shared, right? They're still going to have shared common space, But my understanding of the co-living platforms and the people that are successful is it's just being very, being a good operator, being on top of these issues, making it quick to resolve said issues, and being very quick to get rid of or find an quick exit door for tenants who are increasingly a problem,
Mhm.
right? Whether that's like a cash for keys situation, whatever it may be, like, here, please, there's the door, please leave, kind of thing. And not being afraid to cycle those people out as a means of a pro
Finding
forma
harmony.
number. Yeah, and I think that's my understanding is, and again, just kind of having a higher level of accountability that you are adults, and that you kind of need to have some level of responsibility and acceptance of resolving this matter, and that we're not here providing a daycare service, but we're willing to intervene when it's appropriate, and I
Yeah.
think that's a very fine line that all the operators I've heard of, you kind of have to toe it very easy, very delicately, but be willing to put your foot down and be like, what, like, maybe this person just isn't a good fit, or maybe they're kind of I call them energy vampires, and that person needs to go.
Yeah. And is
So
that because, like, I mean, if you were to try to characterize it, maybe it's too hard to generalize, but like, is it because they just won't clean up after themselves, or just are, I mean, you mentioned energy vampire, or just like are kind of difficult in general? Like, is there a generalization you could point to?
I mean, in my professional life, that's kind of what I dictate as energy vampires. They're just
Yeah.
kind of, woe is me. The problem is always outward facing, never inward facing, and like a true just lack of self accountability. And so when I see those people, it's like, and mind you, like, we're still very young in our operational side. So it's hard for me to answer a lot of these questions. Like, a true operator would probably be able to tell you tons of war stories, right?
Yeah.
We're still just like a core developer. But, and from what I've read and what we've begun to understand about the operating model, yeah, you just have to be very quick to resolve those things. And when there doesn't seem to be a good match or a good vibe between, one person and three or four, you kind of have to root out that one person and say, okay, it's time to move on.
Yeah.
Let's find a way to get you set up somewhere else, and let's bring someone else in. And I think that's where the software platform, I wish I knew. I've only spoke with the owner one time, and I don't want to butcher the name of it. So maybe I'll do a little bit more research on that one. But I think something like that, when I heard about it, I'm like, this is amazing, because when you go through Katie McDurrett, I believe is her name, who wrote the book on co-housing, like actual fundamental developments where people are buying a condominium or townhouse, and then having shared common areas. They talk a lot about community activation, and they're literally funneling people from the beginning of a development process to the end,
Mhm.
complete strangers, taking money from them and kind of helping facilitate that. So if you can imagine, if they can do that, it's like, wow, they have a lot of insight as to how you kind of manage that process. And she touches on that in some of her book. Sometimes there's just that one person who's just kind of standing in the way. It's just like they would give that person their deposit back and be like, hey, and then bring in new people,
Yeah.
to help get the development moving along. So
Okay. And what about like when you are picking roommates to be together, is it like people who are all share a similar interest, or like how do you decide? I mean, are people moving in because they're like want to be friends with each other and do house stuff, or how does that work?
yeah, I think it's again, I think it's all about kind of setting up a core value system of what you need first and foremost. What is the expectations around, it's like anything in a professional relationship. What are the expectations? What are you there for? But yeah, I mean, I would say for us, and again, knowing what we know from operators and what we've started to embed in kind of our own property management strategies, find people who, if you know of a friend, right, that's a great fit, right? Because there's an immediate connection there, without making it too clicky. And beyond that, I think it's just kind of analyzing the different personality types and what people are looking for in a roommate. When we're setting up our questionnaires and we're starting to screen tenants, that'll be a core question. What's the ideal roommate look for you? What are some of their habits? What are some of the things that are immediate turnoffs for you that you just can't live with someone? Describe that good roommate, describe the worst roommate you've ever had, and then just kind of playing a little matchmaking between those and trying to find a way to balance the different personalities.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. And, definitely good luck with the managing of that. And I'll be curious to just follow along. So do you define micro apartments as different than co-living? Because I thought you maybe thought there was said there was some overlap.
Yeah, that's where you're kind of getting into, again, this affordable by design nomenclature. Real estate, we love to create our own nomenclature, right? But a micro apartment is essentially, you have your own in-suite bath, you have a small cooktop, right? You have a little kitchenette,
Yeah, wet
possibly
bar. Mhm.
possibly a refrigerator, but then you're still sharing some of the common living kitchen areas, right? So again, another way for developers to kind of redistribute, bring down studio size, and in lieu of that, be able to provide a much more affordable entry price on rent. So that
Okay,
when
so what would be like a typical size for the micro unit, and how many would you put together? And then like
yeah.
how much common space would there be?
Yeah, great question. I've seen formats at a minimum of around 150 square feet up to call it 275 to three. I think three is, starting to get a little bit large for that. For us, we were, man, I'm drawing a blank on the exact ratio that we were trying to do with common space. I believe from an underwriting perspective, we were always trying to underwrite a minimum of 200 square feet of call it livable space for a person, and then up to 150 square feet of common space, right? So almost like a call it a 60-40 split.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd have to double check where we ended up with these two adaptive reuses. I think we ended up with that a very close to ratio for that. But we also in our historic renovation for the Denver project, we have a lot of dead space because of this like beautiful stairwell. So, it's like, is that common space? No, not technically, because no one's going to be hanging out there. But those are kind of the general underwriting ratios that we were utilizing. And, we
So
haven't
so
done that.
60 for the bedroom and 40 for the common, or vice
Yeah,
versa?
yeah.
Okay.
Like, yeah, kind of a distribution on the whole building.
Yeah.
If we were doing an adaptive reuse type situation, I think obviously developers,
Oh,
you
well,
could,
for the whole building, like, so sorry, 60% would be the small rooms,
yep.
and
And
then
then
40% would
40%.
be common areas.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So like 150 square feet per person of common space.
Per person.
And
Okay, got it.
yeah, and again, we haven't we're still in the process of developing those assets. We haven't I've had those ratios like on our plans, but haven't gone back and detailed them. And then from a pure developer perspective, obviously you can be a little bit more concise or a little bit more generous in any one of those situations. And I haven't seen anyone like go in and break a lot of that down on the micro and co-living because it's still just a fairly new industry, but it'd be really interesting data to kind of come up with. And then even be able
Yeah.
to compare like a vacancy and I know on a price per square foot basis, I mean, I've seen numbers 3x what the local rental rate is. I've seen 1.5x, which seems a little bit more, you know, rational if
Per
you,
square foot, you mean?
yeah, per
Okay.
square.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I remember I visited one. I mean, it looks kind of like an apartment building just near me, but I remember there was some tiny rooms, like more like studios. I don't think I don't know if they had full kitchens or not, but they were pretty tiny. Um, but then there were different sizes. So there were some that were, there were just different size units. But then the common space was just like pretty epic, right? Like there was this beautiful room with like a chef's kitchen and a dining room table and like, beautiful lighting fixtures, and then that you could just reserve and I guess have a dinner party, and then like just a ton of like a rooftop deck and obviously a gym and a pool, and a lot of different common areas that did seem to be getting used, at least back then before COVID. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting, but it kind of just looked like a regular apartment building.
Yeah, and a lot of the developers that are doing co-living are integrating very much a traditional mixed use multifamily ground up strategy, having those common areas, right? And mixed in with like a studio, 1, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom type unit.
Yeah.
Um, and then just integrating a little bit of co-living into some of those units. So I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of cool variations of it. We've seen developers with as many as 3 bedrooms in a co-living all the way up to 6. So
And
and
then those would be living, different people living in 3 bedrooms, or
yeah, so it'd be different people living in a 3 bedroom unit, but it's one dwelling unit, right? So it's
okay.
considered one apartment, and
Yeah.
then all the way up to 6 beds in one apartment in
Okay,
one
got it.
unit. So, and I think that's kind of the soup du jour of just affordability, right? It's
Yeah,
like, frankly, what can you afford, and what exchange are you willing to make?
totally. Yeah,
So
for sure. Very interesting. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing about your insights into the space.
my
Um,
pleasure.
yeah, really interesting stuff. As we start to bring it home, I'd love, Matt, for you to just share with the listeners how they can learn more about you and anything else you want to share.
Yeah, just go check out our website, revive.com, re-viv.com. There's a little schedule calendar on there if you want to schedule an appointment with me to talk more about the industry or investment opportunities that we currently have open. We do have a G Street deal in Sacramento that we're still taking some funds on. But yeah, that's usually the best way to get in touch with me.
All right. Well, I hope you all found this conversation interesting. I certainly find the space very intriguing. And Matt, really great having you on. I hope you check out the re-viv website, and we'll put that information in the show notes. So thanks so much, Matt, for coming on and talking about micro apartments and co-living and your background. Really great having you on, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.